Okay, guck mal, wo ich jetzt heute bin. Yay, Springbank. Man läuft hier entlang, also wirklich hier. Was interessant ist, da vorne ist eine freie evangelische Gemeinde, also eine Kirche, direkt anschließend hier an unser Springbank. Und da kommen wir auf den Parkplatz jetzt hier zu. Diese Bilder kennt ihr wahrscheinlich aus dem Internet auch noch. Springbank Distillery. Und dann geht es natürlich hier nach links, ist dann diese wunderschöne Kirche, blau, schön, strahlender Sonnenschein. Und was haben wir denn da oben? Springbank. Longrow, Hazelburn, Campbelltown Malts. So, heilige Hallen. Wir werden gleich hier reinkommen, unser Distillery Shop und unsere Touranmeldung machen. Auch interessant. So, Treber wird wahrscheinlich hier abgelassen. Also der Schlampe dann da. Stillhouse haben wir hier. Und dann haben wir einfach mal unser Registered Office hier. So, Fässer sind überall hier zu sehen. Und da ist schon Glengyle Kilkerran dann da drüben. Kommen wir gleich dazu. Wenn wir hier schauen, einige Leute sind am Arbeiten. Hier haben wir eine kleine Pyramide von Sherryfässern und die arbeiten damit. Die rollen sie weg, das heißt Sherry wird heute wahrscheinlich offenbar abgefüllt. Hier haben wir unser, sind das Puncheons? Also Hogsheads. Schöne Sache. Und wenn ich hier rüber gehe, sehen wir tatsächlich the Washback Bar. Gut, lernen wir auch ein bisschen, was da ist. Neue Fässern hier. Und hier fand ich auch ganz cool, waren hier diese Dauben. Also und auch dann hier haben wir unser Springbank. Sehr schön. So, und jetzt werden sie gleich hier ein bisschen was runterholen. Ja, dabei sind schon einige Fässer kaputt gegangen. Allerdings, diese Fässer wurden schon mehrfach benutzt. Das sind Sherry-Fässern. Und das heißt nun, dass diese Fässern werden nur noch zu Dauben verarbeitet. Und diese Dauben werden Souvenirs und so weiter. Deshalb war es total egal, ob diese Fässern jetzt hier heil waren oder nicht.
So, as I said, I'm Nicole. I am part of the sales team. Hi, and I've been here for about 2.5 years. But I'm from the island of Islay, so I'm not a Campbelltonian.
We'll be there tomorrow.
I'm from Bourbon. And I look after the German market, so I'm hopefully coming there pretty soon. So I'll tell you a bit about the distillery first of all. Glengyle Distillery was originally established in 1872 by William Mitchell. Springbank and Glengyle's histories are quite intertwined because they were established by the same family. Archibald Mitchell founded Springbank and passed it on to his two sons, William and John. And they ran it in partnership for some time but had a falling out, apparently over sheep on their farm, because back in those days, like many others, they were farmers as well as distillers. And it caused them to go their separate ways. So William Mitchell left Springbank and established Glengyle on his own, just here. So they're only 200 or so yards apart. So both in the Mitchell family, Glengyle was in production until 1925. That's when it ceased and closed down, because lots of distilleries were here in Campbelltown. It's excellently located to make whisky with transport via the sea in our deep harbour here, right up the Clyde and into the centre of Glasgow. So that was one of the main reasons that there were so many distilleries here throughout the 1800s. There were more than 30 operational distilleries at one time here. And they opened up constantly, but sadly at the turn of the century, with prohibition in America and increased transport links from the Highlands down to Glasgow as well, the demand for whisky coming from Campbelltown dramatically decreased, and so lots of distilleries in quick succession closed down as well. Glengyle was one of the last to close, but it did in 1925, as I say. So, really, this distillery, our distilleries are independent. Springbank, which we're going to visit soon, is Scotland's oldest independently owned distillery. And is now in the hands of the 5th generation of the Mitchell family, a man called Mr. Headley Wright. And it was Mr. Wright that got Glengyle up and running because one of the catalysts for that was the threat of losing the regional whisky status of Campbeltown. So his argument was that if we had 3 distilleries operational here, that would be the same as the Lowlands, which was still a whisky region, and so Glengyle was reborn. So he bought the land, bought the buildings, which were in relatively good repair because it had been used throughout the years for other purposes like agricultural, farm supplies, a warehouse, and it had been a rifle club premises for a while, joiners' workshops. It had lots of different uses over the years, which kept the buildings in fairly good repair. It was just a case of getting all of the equipment sourced to get it back up and running as a distillery again. So from the year 2000 to 2004, this is what they did. They re-roofed it, got all of the equipment in, and spirit flowed once again at Glengyle in 2004, March. It actually just had its 18th birthday last month, so that's it. So Glengyle right now, and since we've reopened, it hasn't been operational all through the year. We have one production team who work at both Springbank and Glengyle. So 9 months of the year, generally speaking, we're working at Springbank to make Springbank, Hazelburn and Longrow whiskies, and Campbeltown Loch, I suppose, as well. And then for the final 3 months of the year now, October through to the end of December, they move to Glengyle and make Kilkerran whisky. The only thing that continues to operate at Springbank all year round are the malt floors, because 2/3 of the barley used to make Kilkerran is malted at Springbank, just here. And this is a brand new warehouse actually, so even if you had been here before, lots of people won't have seen this yet. Because we mature 100% of our whiskies on site, we need a lot of warehousing.
Yeah.
But this is filling up pretty fast. It's mainly got sherry butts in it, I believe.
Yeah.
In here. So at the moment, of all the warehouses that we have, there's 8 operational, 5 of those are dunnage and 3 are wrap. This is 1 for wrap.
Okay.
So Glengyle just now is obviously not in production, but we can see the whole place, and go through the process a little bit. I'm pretty sure that you know the process of whisky making already, is that right? But you can see what's happening in here. Talk a bit about the history as well. So we've talked about the history a bit so far, and Campbeltown as a region overall. When we leave the tour, we'll see where the inspiration for our logo comes from. I'll point that out. And one of the other things, the name. So as we've discussed, Glengyle was originally opened and closed down. So I'm sure back then the whisky that was being produced here would have been called Glengyle whisky. But there was a long period of closure, 79 years of no production of whisky here, and when it hadn't for a lot of that time been owned by our company. So the name Glengyle was used to name a Highland blended malt, I believe it was. And so there was discussions, I think, between our company and theirs to get this name back, but it was costly, and also we didn't want to have any confusion between Campbeltown's youngest or newest single malt whisky and an already existing Highland blend. So it was thought that we should give the whisky made here a different name. Kilkerran comes from the original place name of Campbeltown, Keenloch, Kilkerran. So it was almost a way of paying homage and sort of showing our pride in the place itself and the whisky heritage that it has. So the name Kilkerran single malt was given to the whisky made at Glengyle Distillery. It's a wee bit confusing, but that's the story. Right, at the moment we don't do any maltings here. As I said, 2/3 of the maltings is done in Springbank's malt floors to make Kilkerran whiskies. 1/3 of the malt's bought in, and the type of barley that we buy in is unpeated and heavily peated, because we do quite different production processes to make very different styles of spirit. So heavily peated lightly peated, and non-peated. So far, the non-peated spirit hasn't been released, but we do a week's production of that at the beginning of each working year, followed by about 10 days to 2 weeks production of heavily peated spirit, which goes into our peat in progress editions. We're now due to release batch number 6 fairly soon. And
where do you get your peat from?
Well, the peat for here at Springbank comes from the north of Scotland. We don't have a great peat source in Campbelltown now. So there's 2 places, which I'll point out when we're there because you'll see it, but St Fergus Moss, which is a commercial peat moss near Peterhead in Scotland, the northeast tip, and also just outside Inverness, so a farm called Bograin Farm. So the peat's not coming from Campbelltown, and then I would imagine the peat that is used at Baird's Malt, which is where we get our unpeated and heavily peated barley from, will come from the Inverness-shire area, because they're based in Inverness. So, at the moment, no maltings here, but it is something that we would hope to do in the coming years. There's talk of perhaps putting in drum maltings. Really, this was always a pipe dream, but it seems to be something that is actually becoming more of a reality, hopefully. So maybe in the next, well, hopefully 2 to 3 years, we might find that we have those in place. This is where the barley comes in at the moment though. So from Springbank it'll be taken over by trailer, and then it goes into the auger system here and hands up into one of our 2 malt bins on the side. So it's fed in that way. So you're welcome to come in here. This is our mill room. So this is where the barley is stored, and then just down here hidden in the corner is the mill. Obviously as a distillery that was we had to source all of the equipment, as I had pointed out earlier, and some of the equipment was bought or built and made specifically for us, whereas other pieces of equipment like the mill and the stills were bought from other distilleries. So the Robert Bobby mill that we have here came from Glengyle Distillery, and I've been told that it was bought for just £1. They were quite happy for us to just transport it down and get it out of the way. So a lovely old Robert Bobby mill, which I'm sure you've heard of before. Robert Bobby mills were made so excellently well that they now cannot be bought anymore because the company went out of business. They made them too well, just like Porteous, which is what we have at Springbank. So at the top we have our dresser and our magnet chute, so that will remove any metal pieces or fragments from the barley grain before it goes into the mill. It comes down into a coupe system here where batches are weighed out, it's about 40 kilos, so that we don't overflow or overload the mill. And then each 40 kilo batch comes down through the rollers below, breaking our barley down to grist. The grist bin is just here. And then when required to begin a mash, 4.2 tonnes of grist is taken from here, it comes down through the funnel into the bottom, and then a lift system or a bucket system will take it up, and then it will be carried along to the mash tun, which is just on the other side of the wall here. So there's a lot of sort of values and whatnot that make us quite different to other companies.
Yes.
So it's a bit more unusual to the norm. But I think that's part of the charm as well. And I think a lot of companies are finding, we're not the only ones, whisky generally is in huge demand at the moment, but it seems to be, like Springbank especially, is just absolutely under a microscope, and because we're a relatively small distillery, we're not a big distillery. We make maybe 350 litres or so a year, 1,000 litres a year. So in the grand scheme of things, that's pretty small. And the demand has just grown exponentially over the last 5 to 7 years. I mean, there was a time before I was here when my boss would say, we didn't actually sell out of everything. We had to actually try and sell things. Now everything is based on allocation. And even when I joined, Kilkerran was not. But as of this year, we have no more to give of 12-year-old or anything. It's, you get this and we have no more to give you. Yep. Whereas 2 years ago, we would be like, do you want some more Kilkerran? Do you want some more long repeated? And now that's not even the case with these non-age stated and core standard editions. And then with other things, it's just crazy. Like Springbank 25 didn't even go on the shelf. Like, it's unbelievable. So I think we'll be adapting. I think more we might find we're doing ballots and things like that, because it's just really hard to keep it fair and to get the whisky into the right hands, because even when you listen to people we had a release back in March, and it was Springbank 25, local barley, all the rest of it, and people seem to have sussed out that it's no longer available in the shops, but they have some in the distillery shop. So they all came here overnight, camped in the car park. We had 300 people outside the shop at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the Springbank 25 was gone like within 2 minutes. So I think that's not something we want to encourage. We don't. It's not a day to day. We're not prepared to be serving 300 people on a normal day of the week. So I think we'll probably discourage people from doing that by doing ballots and try and cater more for the people who've bought Springbank for the last 20 years and are sort of the original society members who now find it really hard to get a hold of anything. So the thing is that I think there's been a real shift over the last 2 years where people aren't as interested in the whiskies. They don't even actually know anything about the whiskies a lot of the time when they come into the shop. It's because they want to buy it to sell on straight away. So we
call them
to
flippers.
That as much as possible. It's not really in the spirit of it. We want people to enjoy the whiskies and taste them and share them. And really, Glengyle's quite different to Springbank. When we go there, it's a completely different kettle of fish. Springbank's very old, museum-like. It's kind of like a little maze, and I remember when I first started here, finding out where to go. It's like, how do you get to the still house from here again? I can't remember. But Glengyle's completely different because it was built as a nice open plan production area. So once we get in here, it all opens up and you see the whole process pretty much. That's on your right. And the hot liquor tanks for the mashing it over here. And they're lovely big wash bags.
Yes.
So likewise, we've got a sort of slightly more modern style of mash tun. This is a semi-louter mash tun, closed top as well, unlike the one that you're going to see over at Springbank. This was obviously bought for us to reopen Glengyle, so it didn't come from another distillery. This is new to us, and takes 4.2 ton batches of grist. So that's mixed with water in this pipe here. And comes in like a porridge, if you like. So the grist, the broken down barley, mixing with the water, and we do 3 waters here. So the first water is the perfect temperature to reactivate all the enzymes and get the process kick-started. The enzymes are breaking down the starches from the grain down to fermentable sugars, and then the sugars are dissolving into the water, creating our wort, which is really no alcohol, just a sweet sugary water. And in the base of this mash tun you can see it's metal, so we can open that up and it becomes like a big sieve, draining the sweet sugary wort through the base, taking it to one of our 4 wash backs here, via the underback, which is over in that corner. On the way there though, it goes through a powerful cooler or heat exchanger, which is down there. Cooling the wort right down to about 16 degrees Celsius so that when we add our yeast it's not destroyed. The second water enters, a wee bit hotter this time, the water, extracting more of the sugars, which also drains and then comes into the same washback. In total it's about 21,000 litres of wort that we get for one fermentation. But we add a third and final hotter water to remove any residual sugars. Once that's drained, it comes to our hot liquor tank here and will be kept nice and warm to be reused as a first water in the next mash. This mash tun is a lot easier to clean, so there is the hole there just for the arms as they turn. The residual barley, the draft is pushed down there and out to the trailer, or out to the funnel bottomed silo outside, and then it'll be emptied quite easily into a trailer. Again, completely different at Springbank. Elbow grease is required at Springbank. Okay. Elbow grease is very labour intensive in comparison. So our washbacks over here, we've just got 4 of them, but we do 5 mashes every week. 5 fermentations every week. So at the moment these are probably a wee bit funky, and not in the good Campbelltown funk way. They're just filled with water at the moment because the distillery is not in production until later in the year. Mm-hmm. We did produce for quite a while longer though, this year, because our sister distillery Springbank had some essential maintenance to be done before we could get her back up and running. So it was not until March that Springbank could be reopened. It's normally January. So we got another couple of months production at Glengyle this year, but I think we're going to probably be staying at Springbank a wee bit longer this year to counteract that. At the moment we produce about 92,000 litres of pure alcohol here every year within that 3-month period, so it's quite a lot for just a short space of time. As I said, 4 washbacks, all wooden washbacks. All were newly installed when the distillery reopened in 2004, and all have since been replaced as well. One was replaced in 2016, and the next 3 were replaced in 2019. We get a slightly shorter, well, we get quite a bit shorter life expectancy with these because they're not in production or being used all year round, so it's counterproductive a wee bit. So yeah, preferably these washbacks would be filled with wash all the year round and kept nice and healthy, but for a long period they're filled with water, as you see just now, and that water will be replenished throughout the time that we're closed down. All are made from larch, and we continue to use wood. If we replace washbacks, we replace them with wood. We do believe that the wood plays a huge part in the characteristics that are developed in our wash. Never has stainless steel washback been installed at this distillery, to my knowledge anyway. So 5 mashes a week. We have a really long fermentation process as well. It's generally about 100 hours on average, and that helps to develop all the esters which give the sweet, fruity flavours in our beer. Everything at our distilleries, as an independent, traditional distillery company, if you like, that really we just go from one generation to the next, and I know that's what everybody says, but it really truly is how it works here. The older, more experienced stillmen, mashmen, maltmen pass on the tools and skills to the next generation, and that's how it goes. And as much as possible, we're keeping to the same as it's always been, because nobody really wants to be the distillery manager that makes the changes and changes Springbank. So Mr. Wright's very much rooted in tradition, and what's been done by his dad and all this kind of stuff. I'm led to believe. So yeah, not a lot changes, which is part of the charm of it all. So as we do 5 mashes a week, we do have to do the final mash at a slightly higher temperature, so we raise the temperature a little bit to get it working a little bit faster, and it's a shorter fermentation of about 65 hours. But once the 4 at 100 hours, or 4 at about 100 to 110 hours are mixed with the 65, everything kind of evens out about 100 hours on average for the fermenting. To the 21,000 litres of wort, we add 75 kilos of fresh distiller's yeast. So that's 3 bags. The process much the same as Springbank to this point. And then from here, it goes into the wash at about 4% strength, 4 to 6, goes into our wash still. Now here you can see them nicely. These stills are second hand to us. They were originally at the Ben Withers distillery, which I believe is in the Invergordon estate up in the north of Scotland. And there's quite a nice story with that, because the man who reopened this distillery, the man who was our director of production at the time was Mr. Frank McCarty, and he had a really long career in the whisky industry and had started as a boy leaving school at the Ben Withers distillery. But he also knew that this distillery wasn't in production for very long at all. They had lovely, nice new stills which had been barely used, and they were still there, barely used, or never used. So when he was at Glengyle, he inquired about buying them, and that's where he came from. So really sort of aptly, he started his career and ended his career with the same set of stills, because he retired from Glengyle. This is his last distillery to be working at. But I think he maybe does some consultation work now, but as a working man, this was the last distillery he was in. So he did adapt them though. There's a really good video on YouTube of Mr. McCarty talking about the whole process of getting the equipment and back up and running, and his ideas and what he was aiming for in terms of the spirit to be produced here. He wanted it to be nice and light and sweet and floral and fruity. And he said the angular, he describes them as being quite angular. And I think they had descending line arms as well. So when they came in here, they were brought in through the roof and put in place, and then welded with nice flowing, seamless kind of figures like this. So it just allows the spirit to sort of more naturally flow and move still. And also he gave them slightly ascending line arms, so the spirit travels up a little bit before being condensed. Again, contribute to all those nice, sweet, fruity, floral notes that you would expect from something like that. So you're welcome to come down a wee bit. So they're all steam heated. So they are. There we go. So steam heated stills. The wash still here will be taking half of a wash back, so you can expect about 10,500 litres to be coming in here to distill the wash. The vapours rise up the neck, over or up the ascending line arm, and are cooled in our tube and shell condenser here. Travelling down, because it's nice and open plan, you can really just follow the spirit on its journey. So along the pipes here and through our spirit safe. So the first spout on the left-hand side is where the low wines will flow. About 20% or so strength, that comes down and along into the low wines and faints tank just here. Obviously our faints from the heads and tails from the second distillation also make their way to the low wines and faints receiver. So when it's time to begin the next distillation, our spirit's filled into the low wine still over here. Same thing happens, all our spirit starts to travel up, the vapours make their journey up the neck there, along the line arm and are cooled here, back along, and then through the spirit safe in the middle. It's quite an industrial looking spirit safe, it's not like the nice brass polished ones that we see. But here, you can see at the top, our spout can be passed between this connection hole and this one to collect our heads in the beginning, which make their way to the low wines and faints receiver. Once that's completed, move to collect the heart or the new meat, which comes down into this tank, and then back again to collect the tails, which are lower in strength, and that will also make its way to the low wines and faints receiver to be distilled again. So our new makes here, the strength between about probably 68 to 70% strength from here comes along to a small building just out on the other side of that wall. That's where all of our filling happens at Glengyle. So again, just like what I said earlier at Springbank today, this is Friday. Filling Fridays is what happens here at Glengyle and Springbank. So we make spirit all through the week, and then on the final day of the week, everything starts to close down because we're not operational over the weekend in terms of distillation. And the rest of the production team, they'll all congregate and be filling and rolling into new houses to power everything. But we're moving to LPG to be more environmentally friendly. Because the distilleries are so old and kind of haven't been modernised through the years, there's a lot that we can do to be more environmentally aware. And that's something that just last year we decided to sort of tackle. So every department has a responsibility to try, where possible, to be more environmentally friendly. And the materials we use, the packaging, or none, as you might know, we've got rid of basically all of our exterior packaging, except for the older age-stated expressions from 18 plus. But everything else, it's unnecessary. As I think it was put by our director of production, director of sales and marketing, he was like, it's not really the box is irrelevant, it's the spirit that we're all about. It's the quality of the spirit, the quality of the whiskies that we're producing, and that's the main thing. That's what our goal is. It doesn't matter really to us what the box looks like or what whether it comes in a box at all. The one thing we won't do is compromise on the quality of the spirit, but we can happily get rid of the boxes. So that's a big saving. LPG soon though, if not already, actually. Original malt barn here. It certainly looks like that.
Yeah.
But as I said, maybe something less traditional. So we've got the floor maltings down at Springbank, which we'll see. So to have drum maltings would be quite interesting, and something different to see on the Glengyle tour.
They're much more efficient as well.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where all the casks are filled. So normally, when the place is up and running, this would be filled with casks, rows of casks, all stenciled ready for Friday. This is where all the new wheat comes, and then again it'll be reduced to 63.5% by adding water. All of the water used for all of Campbelltown's distilleries comes from a loch or a reservoir called Cross Hill Loch. It's a man-made reservoir just at the foothills of Glengyle, which is the big hill that you see. And that was made through or dammed up to collect the water in the mid-1800s by the Duke of Argyll, who also renamed Campbelltown in the one of his predecessors renamed Campbelltown from Keenloch, Kilkerran, which we talked about, the original place name, the Gaelic place name. It was renamed Campbelltown after themselves, because they're the Campbells, in the mid-1600s, I think it was. He didn't want to stifle, it said, the whisky industry, which was booming and really sort of growing in Campbelltown, so he thought water could be an issue. So the dam was made, or the reservoir was made, to service all of the distilleries. And today, even still, services are made in Scotia and Hazy Rivers. So that's where the water comes from for all parts of the process. Once the spirit's been reduced to 63.5, this is where the casks are filled. We've got our scales here, so the casks are weighed empty, filled, weighed full, and then they do a calculation to figure out the literage, and then the final thing they'll do is stencil off the literage. And then they go to one of our warehouses, of which we have 8, as we talked about earlier. And 100% of the maturation happens here, so we don't send them off anywhere else. Everything happens here, always has, as far as I'm aware, and hopefully always will be consumed here. If we can get enough space for building more warehouses. We've just built that one, and that was a huge expense, so I think we need to save up again and start.
Ja, nun, das war unser Tour durch Kilkerran, Glengyle. Also ganz genial. Also unser Tourguide Nicole war Bombe. Und dann haben wir tatsächlich den Genuss gehabt bei der neuen dort Visitor Center, nenne ich das einfach mal, diese Art Kneipe, The Washback, tatsächlich einfach mal auch ein Kilkerran 12 zu genießen. Es ging für uns gleich weiter, nach 5 Minuten, da haben wir unsere Springbank Tour gemacht und da musst ihr beim nächsten Video auch mit reinschalten und da habt ihr die Eindrücke davon.